Welcome to another episode of Mosef's podcast. I'm Derek Gilling here, your host today and CEO of Mosef, the API Analytics platform. Joining me is Ken Lane, otherwise known as the API Evangelist, a veteran of APIs, and currently the Chief Evangelist at Postman. Really happy to have you here today, Ken.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Definitely. So just jumping into things, I'm curious, how did you get into APIs and what led you to Postman?
Ooh, so historically, I'm a database person. So started working on databases. Here, I'm gonna date myself here. 1988, 87. My first job, and so fast forward that the internet comes out. I'm building database-driven web applications. Come around 2006, 2007. I'm running North American events for SAP. So all of their everything from a meeting up to their 50,000 person flagship Sapphire event. And I was started using Amazon APIs in a new way to scale infrastructure. And I never used APIs in that way before. And then around the same time, I started getting requests to do more mobile apps. And the company that I worked for at the time, we were running all of SAP's North American events, and we had just took on all of Google's events. So I ran Google I/O in 2008 and 2009, and I was both at SAP and Google events. I was getting more asked to build mobile apps, and then the last one I ran for Google was the year they gave away the first Android phone. And so in that, I saw the role that web APIs were playing. And by 2010, I started my own kind of consulting career, which APIEvangelist.com is kind of the face of. And then spent the last decade just really helping organizations think through their API lifecycle and how to optimize and do things more efficiently. And then by 2020 here, or 2019, um, you know, Abhinav and Postman is one of the tools, one of the top performing tools in my toolbox. Everywhere I'm speaking, all when I ask what tools are you using, Postman is top of mind for everyone. And so when it comes to really applying what I've learned over the last decade and making the rubber meet the road when it comes to the API lifecycle, Postman was really top of that list when it comes to places I could go work. And honestly, I have a daughter going through university now, so I needed a job doing the old hustle. Didn't quite pay for college, so it paid the bills, but I needed a job to put her through university. And I kind of like having health insurance now as well, and I get to work on problems and that are of the scope that I really want, and I get to practice what I've been preaching for the last decade. So it's a good fit.
Well, awesome. And we're huge fans of Postman over here at Mosef, and even our last company, great product and great UI. It's interesting to see all the different roles that's popped up within APIs and developer relations. You have developer experience, product management, developer relations itself, but can become quite ambiguous. What does this all mean? What are these different roles and how is it organized at Postman?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the API lifecycle, I would say more people are getting involved in the conversation. For me, that's one of the reasons why web APIs or RESTful APIs were so successful is because they're simpler, they're less technical. In their simplest form, it's a URL with a bunch of query parameters that anyone can use. So they're they're a lot less complicated to use. And when you have a tool like Postman that allows you to make API calls without writing code, it starts kind of breaking down some of these doorways that exist between classic IT and business. And we've just started seeing a lot more opening up of people coming into the conversation with starting with a flood of kind of Q&A and testing folks who need to actually test APIs and understand. But we're starting to see more business stakeholders step up and need that awareness that comes from API management and the analytics that are there, and requesting dashboards and requesting more insights into what is going on with these APIs that are critical behind the web and mobile and device applications that they're using to drive business. And so we're really see as the API kind of life cycle expands and grows, and APIs aren't something you're like, should we be doing? And like everyone's doing them. All mainstream companies now are realize that they should be doing APIs. Opening up this layer of awareness to business stakeholders is proving to be pretty critical. So we're seeing sales teams emerge as a persona that we're catering to. We're seeing analysts, we're seeing, other VPs and other business stakeholders. So, according to the state of API report that Postman produces, I think it was almost 13,000 people the last time filled it out. We're just seeing a lot more of those roles emerge. And then we're seeing that inside of Postman as well. Like we're seeing more of our marketing folks using Marketo's APIs or using Salesforce APIs in combined with collections to actually understand more about what the tools that they're already using the Salesforce APIs, using Marketo's APIs, but then using Postman Collections to extract that data, make sense of what's going on. And so APIs are just everywhere. They're beneath everything that we touch, in our personal and business lives. And I think more people are waking up to that fact, and they're needing tools that help them make sense of all this world that's kind of unfolded under our feet, but is also fast growing and fast changing and evolving.
Definitely. And when it comes to things like Postman Collections, what's some of the more interesting things that you've seen or more interesting surprises when different companies try and implement new APIs?
Well, I mean, from the basic kind of stabilizing things, that once you have a collection with a set of tests running on it, that you're able to start measuring all APIs across an organization equally in a kind of standardized way. So people starting to think about not just testing but also governance, and it reveals how different APIs are across the same organization. The company might be Adobe, or the company might be, Microsoft, or, but how they build APIs across each teams varies widely. And I don't think people always see that. And so once you start standardizing and saving collections, running tests, sharing them and collaborating across teams, and you start seeing some of the weird things that can emerge, I think people are really realizing, well, we're not all rowing in the exact same direction that as we thought we were. And so I think when you're able to set up an API call, save it as a collection, and then share it amongst other stakeholders and say, just hit run on this and see what you get, you start really kind of standardizing how people talk and communicate and work around things. And I would say people just aren't always realize how different each team approaches, and those differences across orgs, I think, are pretty eye-opening for a lot of folks.
And do you see a difference when it comes to API governance at a larger company versus maybe a smaller startup?
Well, I mean, I would say it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot more of the human aspect
Mhm.
to kind of set in motion. When you're at a smaller company and you want to do governance, you've got less of a surface area and less people involved in that. So it's sometimes a little easier to institute. But as a number of teams, number of APIs grows, um, that becomes a much more human thing. You have to go around and educate people about, well, what is Postman? What is Open API? How do you use Open API to define your contracts? Oh, and then here's how you use Postman to test and monitor and execute those API calls in a way that we can report on governance. And so I would say the biggest difference is really just that investing in the human training, education, workshops, feedback loop around governance. Otherwise, you end up with people not really caring, not people revolting when it says, well, hey, we don't want to do that. We don't feel, because we haven't given any feedback on what is governance, why governance, and what those tests are about and what the reporting is. And so just the larger the groups, the more kind of dog and pony show you got to have around why governance, what is it, and then that evolution of it. Because if you don't have the team buy-in, it's going to be pretty hard to do, and that's just a lot easier when your company's smaller.
No, definitely. Moving on to the next area, which is around developer experience. We hear a lot about this around developer empathy, but what does it mean to be developer first?
Ooh, yeah. I I mean, I think developer experience definitely starts with a portal and documentation around your API, but providing them with analytics and usage and insight into what's going on with their API consumption. And so I think early API management was really about developing awareness for the provider who's using, making sure you're keying up and every API that you have, putting a rate limit in front of it and measuring it, and then providing analytics so you understand how your APIs are being used. I think that the ones that kind of internalize that and really care about their developers also share that with their developers, that awareness, that insight, but at their little slice of the pie. So giving developers a piece of that dashboard and analytics and insight so that they can improve their usage and understand what they're using or what they're not, or their app is super chatty. And then I would say sharing more of that across, not just their slice of that pie, like what are other developers doing, what are people doing in similar industries as I am, like how do my usage size up against other developers in this. And so it becomes a shared developer experience. So it's just not, hey, your docs are great and I'm getting the awareness as a developer through a dashboard that you provide me, but I also feel like I'm part of a community. I see how other people are doing it. I can improve my apps and my consumption. I can make them less chatty because I'm just like pulling the hell out of the API. But oh, look over here, there's a group of developers using webhooks. I didn't even know about the webhooks. And so I would say that that community sharing of the insights and awareness that API management has brought, and making sure that they're tuned in, that it's providing value to their world. And then I would say you have some actionable goals around activating them. So how do you actually activate and increase the engagement of your developers through a better and perpetually improving developer experience by providing them with more insights and understanding?
Cool. And when it comes to, that activation, are there ways to measure this developer success? And what does developer success look like?
Yeah, I mean that's really tough because it's, I've kind of been pushing on this notion of when I sign up for a developer, let's say I sign up for the Twitter API, I have to sign up and say, oh, here's my app that I'm building, give you a title and description before Twitter will give me my keys. And most of the time, I don't know what I'm building, And then especially me as the API evangelist, I'm usually not building an app. I'm usually just kicking the tires, writing a story, understanding what's possible. So the paradigm of an app never fit me. But I'm also, I would say, a special snowflake in that context. I'm trying many different APIs and never building an app. But even for those who are building an app, or the notion of what is an app, I'm just building an integration. I just want that Twitter data in a Google Sheet. I'm not building an app. I just want to be able to integrate the SaaS services that I depend on each day to help make sense of this. So I think the notion of what is an app needs to evolve before we can deliver the proper developer experience, and before we can start really measuring that effectively. Because if someone's just doing an iPaaS like integration, I just want to flow between, the metrics are going to be radically different than if I'm building a mobile app, or if I'm building a web app, or if I'm building a widget, or if I'm building an IoT app. And so the types of metrics, what we measure and report upon, and how we then activate and move developers forward in that experience is going to vary widely. And it gets back to, I would say, those personas of, well, who's actually using our API. Is it hardcore backend developers building mobile apps, or is it, business people looking to, better orchestrate and connect the systems they use on a regular basis? So I think people got to start really getting a handle on, well, what is an app, or does this even apply? Should we throw the concept of app out the door and just let users sign up, and just start playing with things? I think that's one of the frustrations I have with a lot of APIs, is if I'm on Twitter, I have to go to developer.twitter.com to a separate area. And sure, I can authenticate and sign up with my Twitter account, but I still have to create apps and get my metrics over there. It's always this other place where if you use solutions like Cloudflare does this really well, where me as a user of Cloudflare, I log in and behind every dashboard widget on the page, not everyone, but most of them, there's an API button in the bottom corner that I can grab the API call with the key to make a call to that API. Just immediately just hit grab it, copy and paste into Postman or other, and hit send. My account isn't separate. My keys aren't separate. So I think the notion of what is a developer experience needs to be melded with just what is that app experience, or what is that platform experience, and what is the holistic overall platform experience that we need to cater to get people using APIs. And I think once we get over that kind of friction point in kind of the current notion of what is a platform versus an API, platform versus an app being built on that, I think you're going to see entirely new types of usage emerge and new ways of measuring and creating experiences for folks.
This is a really interesting point where, in this case, it's not about having a single developer experience, but it's actually more of a way of thinking, right? It's embedded within the app, doesn't matter what team you're part of.
Yeah, and that kind of thinking is going to be more aligned with your business goals. Too often an API is a secondary project that got done and we check that box. It's not in alignment with the overall core business goals because it was this side thing done over here and you link to it over here. No, it should be part of what is our platform experience, and integrations and SaaS integrations like Zapier and if this, then that, and all, that's commonplace. Low code, no code automation with APIs is commonplace. And that does not fit into this sidebar narrative of what is developer experience. It should just be your overall platform user experience.
Then if I'm part of a developer experience team, what should I be judged on? Is it revenue? Is it something different? Hard to say, right?
Yeah. I mean, revenue, you're gonna, you're gonna just piss a bunch of people off pretty quickly. But depending on your developer team, you're gonna rub them wrong pretty quickly. But yes, everything we do at a company, I mean, maybe that's one of the things that caused the misalignment with overall business objectives is us developers wear these special snowflakes off over here and don't make us sell. Yes, but we also need our paychecks paid, and the company's got to make money or we all lose our jobs. So I think we need to just start having a more honest conversation about that. But I think ultimately for me, I want to, as DevRel or evangelism or any spectrum in between, I want to be measured on the impact that I'm making. So that's going to be stories I tell, um, blog posts, webinars, white papers, case studies, things like that. So I should be measured on the stories and the impact of those stories that I make, measuring how I reach. But Postman, this is one of my OKRs for what I got to report on is like the number of collections that I get added to the Postman network. Now, this may seem very Postman specific, but it's not, because it's Postman collections for me are like, okay, the first one's always, here's the entire API reference collection. Here's all the things that are possible. That's pretty ground zero and that's pretty boring. But for me, the next collection is always a more DevOps, API ops, business workflow collection. All right. So if it's, it's a e-commerce API, here's the first reference collection, all of the endpoints. But the next one is searching for a product, adding it to a cart, checking out on the cart, getting that invoice. Okay, I want that collection that does all of those steps and as a self-contained collection. And so it's really those second gen and third generation collections that start getting at what the business value is, why we're actually doing this. And so those are the types of things that I think DevRel should be measured against, is how do I translate our APIs and developer cycles into something that solves an actual real world problem, a real business use case, and then brings customers to us. So that brings customers to us can kind of be decoupled from it to make us feel warm and fuzzy as DevRel people in our little bubble. But I think that actionable right up to that still has to be there, and we've got to be held accountable for that one.
Now, this brings up a really good point around, API ops, trying to align it back to business value. But what does all these different buzzwords mean? API ops, API observability, there's a few others floating around.
Yeah, I mean, these are just, API ops for me is just, an extension of DevOps, which is just the little incremental things that we have to do throughout our day to get our job done. It's setting up a database, it's indexing that database, it's pushing code, CI/CD, it's running a test as part of that CI/CD. So breaking down all those tasks and looking them at this is my toolbox of what, as a developer, this is what I need to accomplish in a day. And as those roles expand that you talked about early on, is as this is, I'm a Q&A and tester, what does DevOps look like for me? If I'm a low code, no code, if I'm an analyst, if I'm working on just sales or marketing automation enablement, what are those little tasks that I need to accomplish during my day? If you're in marketing, it's like Salesforce, Marketo, all of these platforms that I depend on. What are those little functional things I need to accomplish? And so ops level APIs for me, kind of APIs do well at defining what those are. So back to what I said about a reference collection, the reference collection for Marketo is, here's the entire menu of everything you can do with the Marketo platform. API ops or DevOps is now, how do we then combine one or many of those API calls into something that is actually tangible in my daily work as a developer, all the way up to these other business personas. And so that's the key part for me, is really defining what those are, because that becomes a version of your enterprise capability. That's what you're capable of accomplishing on a daily basis. And having them defined as collections, having them executable and usable and shareable. So it's like, hey, look, I set up this cool new workflow with sales between Salesforce and whatever. I can capture that. I can then share it with a team member and say, hey, do this. And then they can tweak and make it work for their world. And it's that type of that ops level collaboration, I think, is where the rubber's really going to meet the road in the next decade.
No, really love looking at it from a collaboration standpoint. How do we get more people using these different APIs into the various collections? But at some point, we had to get rid of them, right? I mean, there is a life cycle for any of these products. What are some good things you've seen in terms of deprecation guidelines, versioning guidelines, and where do people usually mess up?
Yeah, I mean, versioning is tough as far as the API lifecycle. There's a lot of opinions on how you do it. There's even a lot of opinions on not doing it, that you shouldn't do it. Versioning is bad. For me, versioning is just really being open and honest and about change. It's about change management and having a plan. If your plan is to not actually semantically version your code or your collections or your APIs or your documentation, great. But have a plan and communicate that and show how it actually allows you to move faster and produces less friction. If you just kind of throw it out there and say, oh, we don't version because we don't want to, and then you have no change management plan, it's not the way you want to go. So I've seen both. I've seen, I know Netflix is one that they do very well without versioning. They have a whole different strategy. Tune into their engineering blog if you want to learn more about that. But when it comes to versioning, semantic versioning is kind of dominant. But really, the having a strategy and what is change, and then how do we communicate change, and internally amongst teams, but then externally with our consumers. That's really the core of what is versioning to me. It's not the technical details of doing it. It's that we have a plan and we're communicating around it, and people understand what we're saying when we talk about it. Excuse me. And so open API is with semantic versioning is one of the ways that you stabilize this communication. Here's a contract for version 1. This is what I mean. This is what you're going to get. Okay, when we go to version 1, 2, here's what you're going to get. Here's what I mean, and here's that time frame of when you're going to get it. And then you're communicating expectations around change. Okay, we're at version 12 and version 9 is going to go away because we only support X amount of versions. And so really it's not semantic versioning that is the real meaningful thing there. It's the fact that I can communicate to you what is version 9, what is 10, 11, 12, 13, all the way. I can communicate effectively a time frame of when 9 is going to be deprecated. And then further kind of extensions that communications, how do I communicate that with you? A lot of Rastafarians and people who believe in using the web, which is important, believe that the version should be in the header. The version should never be in the path of your API. Now, if you're actually working in the space, you realize no, actually probably 70% of the versions you come across are in the path, which is like goes against everything the Rastafarians believe in and the scripture that was handed down from the API gods. And so, but the problem is a lot of developers don't know headers exist, and so they don't even know to look for the version in the headers, and thus the communication around change breaks down. And when it's in the path, it's right in your face, and it's easy to understand, and it's easy to navigate between major versions. And so that just shows the importance for me. It shows the importance of communication, and that's the thing around change management that matters, is that we're able to say, hey, you're on this version, hey, I'm on this version, hey, you need to switch to this version. And if you look at like Stripe, when you come in the first API call that you make, they pin you to a version, and that's the version you're at. Like you have to consciously say, oh, I'm going to this version, because that's the mindset people are in. You onboard, you're using this version, that's your Stripe context. Now don't mess with that. I'm working in that context until I say I want to go to another version. And so really versioning comes down to just having a strategy, realizing the communication, and making sure that depending on your audience, you're communicating those things in the right way. And there's other things you can do, like there's a sunset header that you can pass when are we going to deprecate this, and then that time frame moves closer. That header can be used to communicate this in different ways, and so that the biggest damage and problems that I see people make with versioning is they don't communicate. They don't have a plan. Like, oh, I'm launching this API. You should have a deprecation date. Like I intend on supporting this version that we just created for 18 months. And most APIs don't do that. So it could live forever. But then what usually happens is, because we never communicated that, this API could just disappear next week because I never really communicated when it's going to go away or how long it's going to be around. So I therefore reserve the right to just make it disappear next week. And it's that kind of breakdown in communication that are the biggest sins, I think, that we see across the space.
Totally agree that communicating anything with deprecation or change of versions is really important, especially as you mentioned, adding it to the URL now with stuff like webhooks is right in your face. Sometimes those headers can get buried. You don't even see the header, right?
I'm always amazed at the super smart PhD level programmers I come across in my career who don't know about headers. And I would never call someone stupid or dumb for not knowing that, because it's just there's so many things blasting us around us that we did. I don't think everyone got the HTTP course. They were doing C++ and they were doing hardcore things, and they just never quite learned about the web and how HTTP works. And when I finally got that, I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So now I'm in the know, but there's a lot of people out there who are super smart, super competent and capable, but just don't quite get an HTTP header and what it is, and how much gets stuffed in that. And what's the difference between it and a query parameter or a body parameter? I don't think there's a lot of awareness around that, and there should be a little bit more training and workshops for people.
Definitely. And how forceful should like an API product manager or someone be at pushing someone to the next version or to new API? And what are some other ways to communicate, if those deprecation headers are get buried?
Yeah, I mean, it's this is where sometimes it goes beyond the technology of APIs. It goes into the business. I had one time a print API that I was designing the new one for, and then I was like, oh, we only got 5 users left on the oldest version. Let's push them all off, and 4 of them went and responded. The fifth one submitted a print job every Monday morning that was worth $500,000. We
Wow.
didn't force them to version and switch. They couldn't do it. The guy who built it left. They didn't know how to switch it, and the whole company's print for the week was dependent on this, and it was $500,000. So guess what? We stopped the pushing on them, you know? And so there's things like that that are just out of technical control. But I would say you want to have a nice, as part of the change management communication, you want to have a nice logical pace, strolling forward and reaching back. Hey, are we leaving anybody behind? Hey, you guys in the back there, what do you need to understand the future and moving forward? Um, and be not supporting too wide of a spread of APIs. You look at like Salesforce, they're still supporting that first API they stood up in day one. That's 20 years later. I mean, do you want to be doing that? So again, it comes down to the communication. You just got to be knowing your consumers. And really it comes down to the API management layer and the analytics and awareness is like, if you don't know who your consumers are and you've never had a conversation with them, you probably can't push them forward too fast. But if you know who they are and you regularly have conversations with them, you can probably march forward pretty fast.
Definitely agree there. Before making any big decision like that, understanding who is impacted, what the impact is to both your customers and your business itself is always important.
Yeah, huge. It's very important.
But I mean, sometimes we have to force people to a new version if there's a security, a vulnerability or something like that. When is it up to the provider to say, hey, I'm responsible for my customers' integrations and I should get them to the next version? And how can you actually force that happen?
Yeah, I mean, this is, this, you got to make calls like this and how you allow for integrations. I mean, this was supposedly one of the promises of hypermedia,
Mhm.
is having APIs where your clients don't actually when you issue a new version, you're not going to break all your clients because they're kind of version agnostic. They have a set of links that they follow. I know to look for that next and previous link. I know to look for things in the API call. I'm not actually bound to the next is always /v3 so it really comes down to how you design your APIs, and then that's how you enable your consumers to design and develop their integrations. If you're providing them with SDKs that are robust and well done, and they don't have to write a lot of that code, you're going to have less brittle code, and you're going to have more control over that code that's in people's applications. So if this is really that SDK, and I wouldn't say just SDK, but platform development kit. If you're providing more of those resources to your consumers, you're going to have a greater say in how they can move forward because you've taken on the ownership of those integration details, and you're going to be able to say, hey, this isn't going to break something. We're going to go forward to version 8. You're all going to come along, and oh wait, except for you because you did your own little custom thing. But hopefully you can minimize those pools by providing more integration resources for people.
Has OpenAPI changed any of this, especially when it comes to SDK design, communicating some of these changes?
Yeah, it's really, I would say it's kind of the crux of why I see a lot of major providers switching to OpenAPI recently is because of the code gen capabilities. Is they're tired of of supporting, 10 different programming languages, SDKs that are all hand rolled. And so realizing that if they just invest in their open API properly, um, auto generate and auto refine and clean that up, and then that becomes the central truth of the API lifecycle, then your docs, your overall docs and developer experience there is better. But yeah, it really pushes on that code gen piece, is that you can uh, generate your client libraries in a variety of languages much faster, much quicker, in a much more consistent way. And then you can also get at some of those other integrations as well. So other iPaaS platforms, the Zapiers and if this then that, they can just grab your open API for your platform, and boom, you got an integration and you're on an integrations page for iPaaS. And same with other SaaS providers. If they want to add you to their integration page, they don't have to wait for you to do it. They can grab your open API and do that. And then that just adds to the playing field when it comes to the integrations that are possible. And they're all dependent on that contract, that open API truth. They're not all custom code, custom, develop things that are going to break when you do march forward.
Cool. No, definitely. And when it comes to stuff like open API, super exciting to see, the change in different tools and things in the API space. But what's next for APIs? I mean, a lot of stuff has changed in the last, I guess, half a year even.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's just, for me, it's a lot more of the same. It's like I'm seeing, Salesforce, Twilio, Dropbox, Twitter all adopt an open API driven API lifecycle for the reasons we just talked about. And so I would say it's more of that. It's like people realizing, oh, we're not just doing Swagger because we need docs. No, we're actually realize Swagger is not the spec anymore. We're doing open API and we're doing docs, we're doing mocks, we're doing test generation, we're doing security scanning and fuzzing, we're doing code gen. So we're really going all in on API first, meaning that we got to have this contract before we develop anything on top of it. And this contract is driving every stop along our API lifecycle, which is now well defined. And so that's the next decade. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I realized none of this moves forward as fast as we would like. So that's really the big piece. I would say the new elements of that are going to be around discoverability, meaning now you can find all your APIs because you have a contract defined for them. Now you can actually be compliant, and now you can actually scan all of your APIs consistently. API providers requiring, before an API goes into production, there's got to be a complete and robust open API definition before you can ever push anything to a pipeline. So I would say that's really the future. And I know people hate it when I do these because it's not super cool, but just stabilizing your life cycle, making it open API and contract driven. But with that said, I would say what comes with that maturity is people then realizing, well, we need to do webhooks because we've got a couple successful APIs that people are pulling a lot, and to kind of reduce that infrastructure load, we're going to publish some webhooks. And oh, by the way, we should also probably do a pub sub, Nats or Kafka or some other TCP related. And so expanding your API toolbox beyond just REST and going GraphQL, going PubSub, and using WebSockets, or or going gRPC. So I would say what's next is really acknowledging that it's a diverse API toolbox. It's not just REST. That'll remain king, or top. It'll be the kind of gateway drug for anyone doing APIs. It'll be the base of our API operation. But depending on your consumers and the types of applications and integrations you're doing, you might need a GraphQL API that's more data intensive and giving your developers a little bit more control over querying. If you're heavy B2B, you're probably going to go with some gRPC APIs that are a little more higher performing. But we still need all of the same basic stuff, that came with API management. We still need, analytics, rate limiting, and insights into all of those layers. and we need testing, we need mocking, we need documentation. So we need the same stops along the API lifecycle. It's just the future is really going to be, well, that might not be just HTTP 1.1. It's likely going to be HTTP 3. It's likely going to be TCP. It's going to be MQTT if it's more device IoT. And that diverse toolbox really represents the future.
I'm really happy that you touched on GraphQL. Super exciting area right now in the enterprise. What's some of the challenges though when it comes to GraphQL? And is it something that everyone should adopt? It sounds like sometimes this is like the SQL versus no SQL debate, or does it make sense for every application?
Yeah, so whether it's something everyone should adopt, no. Whether it's a critical tool in some people's toolbox, yes. Um, the biggest challenge with GraphQL is the way that it was positioned and sold. Is that it's been positioned as a replacement for REST. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. It's not a replacement for REST. It's not a API pattern that works for all APIs. Now, if you've got a known set of consumers who are rapidly building certain types of mobile responsive applications, who really understand your underlying data model, hell yes, give them a GraphQL endpoint and get the hell out of their way. Let them do what they do best. So if it's a data project with those type of setup, like if you've got known users, like it is a must have. But look at like what GitHub's doing now. They've made a real big push into open API recently. I think they're going to still do some storytelling about why they're doubling down on open API and their REST API while also still supporting GraphQL. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in there that we'll hear about. And um, so yeah, it should be both should be part of your diverse API toolbox. I would say some of the other challenges with GraphQL are going to be, I wish the creators had embraced the HTTP standard a little bit more. I agree that we need a query pattern that's standardized. Should be baked into HTTP. It
Definitely.
shouldn't be a separate thing, because then you're going to start solving other challenges with GraphQL around caching and performance. And a lot of those solutions have been done in a proprietary way that's like, here, use this vendor and use this tool, and caching's just magically done for you. That's that should be an HTTP standard as well. Like HTTP, there's a lot of caching solutions in there. So really those are some of the challenges, but in the right situation, if you know your who your consumers are, GraphQL is gonna allow you to build things a lot faster, be a lot more flexible and agile in how you get data and content out there. So there's definitely a place for it.
Totally agree. It's hard when it comes to the stuff like caching, where we already did have standards around that, and now GraphQL breaks everything, even the status codes. I'm not sure why we can't just use the
Yeah.
same HTTP status codes we already had. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
all
But
broken now.
this is what happens when you don't really embrace the web or understand. And it's akin to what we talked about earlier with the header literacy. So a lot of people just take for granted the web and how much work, how much investment, and how much it actually brings to the table. And before they go building these new solutions, or they should spend some more time understanding the web and go, oh, that's why status codes exist. I never really quite understood, and it's back to what I said about change management. Status codes are about communication. They're about communicating good things and bad things, and whose fault it is, and at scale. And we've already hashed these out. Let's not reinvent the wheel.
I totally agree. And just when it comes to education and getting into APIs, what are some recommendations for the new college grads out there looking to join a career in APIs, or maybe develop relations or a different area?
Well, I'm biased, but of course you started APIEvangelist.com. But no, I mean, beyond that, Nordic APIs is a great place to get information about the API space. I have a roundup, I believe, what's it called? Like, it's like API Knowledge Center. I actually should put it like as a banner on the homepage of API Evangelist. I think I'll do that this week. But it's kind of a roundup of what are the resources in the space. So it's a listing of all the top API blogs, There's a handful of API newsletters out there. My friend Matt Reinbold's got one. James Higginbotham has another. So search for the handful of API newsletters. Both of those come up if you Google it. Those will keep you in tune with what's going on, give you some good roundup of stories. But really, I'm working hard to kind of invest in the Postman platform for onboarding new developers. So the Postman API network, there's quite a few APIs in there that are. I have one that's public REST APIs. That's like 100 different APIs that don't require authentication, so they're really easy to use. And there's ones like, every topic. If you're into books, if you're into cats, if you're into dogs, I got ones on Bitcoin. There's ones on, Chuck Norris jokes. So whatever you're interested in, there's a free API, a public API that you can then kick the tires on and see what it's all about. And you can, it's easy to use with Postman. So I'm trying to create more of those collections to onboard folks. And I do a lot of speaking to university students and trying to convince them why APIs matter, why it's going to impact their career. And so I'm building more of these types of collections that show, hey, you're going into archaeology, here's a collection for you. Hey, you're going into accounting, here's a collection for you. Going into public policy and management, here's one for you. So I've been working on more of those, but there's a handful in the Postman network that will kind of onboard you with the world of APIs and help you kind of see it. So, but with that said, this is something that us as the space collectively should get better at, creating a kind of more of a canonical source of where you get up to speed on APIs. It historically has been programmable web, but it's just not the destination and source it should be, or it needs to be, to get us into the future. I would say it still represents the last 15 years, not really the next 15 years. So we need to do better.
I'm definitely gonna have to take a look at the Chuck Norris jokes. That looks quite interesting.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much,
Critical
Ken.
API there. Critical API.
Well, thank you very much, Ken, for joining us today. Always love hearing your insights on the API space and API lifecycle. Have a good one.
Yeah, you guys know where to find me. Let me know if you need to do more.
You too. Thanks.